This fall at a girls' soccer sectional game that I was attending, Kari Ferguson came over and sat by me. Thank you. First of all, Kari, for doing that, not making me feel like a total loser. Kari came over and actually started a conversation with me, and one of the things that he ended up asking me was this: Father, when are we going to talk about sex? Kari's question got me thinking. It got me thinking about how I had, at least in my first year, failed you. Failed you to talk about the issue of sexuality in terms of how the Catholic Church views it. And maybe we as a school have failed you. But I certainly know that in reflecting on what Kari was asking, that I have failed. That I have failed to address one of the central questions that most young people have. But most oftentimes people fail to talk about, either because they're embarrassed or because they lack the courage. This is Catholic Schools Week, and one of the benefits of a Catholic high school is that we can, if we work at it as a team of parents and teachers and administrators, we have the freedom to talk about what sex really is. Sexual education in public schools basically revolves around the idea of two things: trying to instill a fear of you of sexually transmitted diseases and a fear of pregnancy. Oftentimes then, in those situations, contraception is pushed as the answer to those two fears. Contraception being one of many things: birth control pills, condoms, shots, patches, anything that is designed to eliminate the fear of pregnancy. Also, oftentimes in public school systems, you will hear, depending on which one you're at, one of a myriad of other things as well. The idea that pornography doesn't hurt anyone and can be healthy. The idea that masturbation is healthy and is way better than trying to restrain your sex drive. Oral sex isn't actually sex, and many other things along those lines. Before diving into what the Church actually says, I think it's important up front to address a concern that we often hear, especially as priests. The concern or the thing leveled at the Church is that the Church is obsessed with sex. They have all these rules about sex and are always talking about sex. But is it the Church that is obsessed with sex, or are we? And is the Church merely trying to help us deal with our obsession? If we are always thinking and obsessed with sexuality, then the Church, maybe, is only trying to help us with that obsession and trying to place it in its proper context. Let's look at the situation today. Today, TV is often softcore pornography. I've often said that I have no problem with sexuality on TV if it were ever portrayed realistically. I would have no problem with sexuality on TV if they showed people one time regretting their actions in the morning, show one person hurt or abandoned, show young girls who thought that a man was going to fulfill all their desires only to find themselves left completely and emotionally abandoned. But we never see that on TV. Here, some say that people who feel bad after giving in to their sexual desires only feel bad because the Church taught them to feel bad. Good old Catholic guilt. But first of all, I can say that for our generation, that is impossible, because in 31 years of existence, I have never heard a homily about saving myself for marriage. I've never heard a homily about the problems with sex before marriage. I've never heard a homily about the joys and beauty of sex within its proper place. I've never heard a homily about contraception. So how is it that me feeling bad about violations of my sexuality is the Church's fault, if the Church that we've grown up in has largely failed to address it? Also, I know that this isn't true because the people who come into me in the confessional all the time, confessing that their lives have been battered by their decision to trade their virginity for a card that says, "I've ridden the sex ride. Don't worry about me, I'm experienced." I've dealt with the people who come into confessional crying, emotionally abandoned, emotionally charged, emotionally devastated from that. I don't think it's the church that's teaching people to feel bad about violating their sexuality. I think it comes from within. I want to paint a picture of premarital sex that I wish someone would have painted for my generation when I was growing up. Sex before or outside of marriage is satanic communion. Satan is the perverter of truth. And if sex is the greatest physical pleasure that we have been given, the greatest gift of God that we have been given as human beings outside of the sacraments, then the perversion of that gift is satanic. And that is what sex is before or outside of marriage. It is a satanic sacrilege of the greatest degree. So many today make a mockery of sex. First of all, it is used to sell products on television and radio and elsewhere. Advertisers know that if they can turn you into people who think only with your sex drive, then you are easily manipulated and easily controlled. Are you going to be controlled by your impulses or not? Are you going to be the raging man in the gospel for whom chains could not keep bound? Or are you going to control your impulses and think about what they actually mean? Another way today people make a mockery of sexuality is by the increasing rate of cohabitation. Men and women now live together for months and years before marrying, rendering the actual marriage vows almost meaningless. But nonetheless, the bride shows up to the wedding wearing white, a symbol of purity, although oftentimes she has slept with her future husband nights before. I am now shocked, actually, when someone asks me to marry them and they're not living together. But the tide is changing slowly in this department. Myself and other priests are refusing to marry people living together. Oftentimes, the reasons that are cited for living together are the opportunity to save a couple of $1,000s in rent. I think here it's important to remember Jesus' words, "What good is it to gain the whole world, but to lose one's soul?" Some of these couples that are living together and having sex before marriage are losing their souls for a few $1,000s in rent. Then there's the issue of contraception. Contraception, again, a category of things designed to prevent the birth of children. And this includes the pill, shots, patches, and condoms. Contraception is sexual bulimia. Bulimia is the process of enjoying the pleasure of eating things, but then going to the toilet and throwing the food up. Contraception is a similar thing. And if it is a condom, it is almost the exact same thing. When a man uses a condom, he and his partner enjoy the sexual pleasure, but then go in and flush the man's semen down the toilet. We also have couples getting sterilized at an alarming rate in our society. Sterilization either involves cutting the veins that support a man's testicles so that he cannot have sperm, or interrupting the process of a woman's fallopian tubes so that she cannot produce eggs. In both of these processes, men and women, married and unmarried, are taking that element that sets humanity apart, the ability to co-create other human beings with God. People are taking that ability and are saying to God, "Thanks, pal, for the offer, but I have my own ideas in mind." We live in the richest society of all time, infinitely so. And yet we often say that we can't afford to have children. We are not even having children at a rate to replenish our society. So we, the richest people to ever live, are the first to stop having children because we can't afford it. Again, I talk to people who have gone through this all the time in the confessional: sterilization, contraception, sex outside of marriage, and their lives are usually a mess because of it. If I sound angry up here or harsh because I see the pain, if I sound angry up here or harsh, it is because I see the pain all the time from these sins. I'm not mad at the people who do them, and if a priest or the church ever gets mad at people, know that they are not actually of the church. But it is very sad to work with the people who are deceived into doing such things by the devil. Sometimes we just use sex because it is pleasurable. Pope John Paul II said famously that the opposite of love is not anger, but it is to use another person. And we do that. We use the other person. We lie to people just to get them to agree to let us use them. Sometimes in our society now, we even agree to simply use each other. And we basically say that up front. Let's just use each other. But this doesn't work either. The movie No Strings Attached that came out this weekend, although I'm sure in a very raunchy fashion, does get one thing right. Even if you think you are simply using each other, there is still a bond that is formed in the sexual act that causes severe psychological damage to later try to deny. Some of you have already had sex, and I want to say to you that if you have, it is possible to start over. Imagine saying to your future spouse, in order to be honest, I want you to know that when I was in high school, I messed up and I lost my virginity. However, I also want you to know that I've waited 5 or 10 or 15 years for you. That would be a very powerful thing to say to someone. Having a healthy understanding of the pitfalls of sexuality in our country is important because we need to know them when we are young, and we need a healthy fear of things. A parent doesn't first explain the intricacies of heat conduction and the melting point of human flesh to a 2-year-old child. They simply tell their child, the stove is hot. But the church's teaching is not just, you better not do that. The real benefit of being in a Catholic high school and looking at the issue of human sexuality is that we can actually say what sex is really for. Our public school brothers and sisters are only allowed to talk about such things from a negative standpoint. Don't do that or else. But we know that there is more to the beauty of sexuality than just a message of you better not or else you'll get in trouble. Giving in to our sexual urges is not something that is masculine or strong. The church considers chastity to be a virtue, which means it takes strength. Someone once said that it takes someone with heroic virtue today to remain chaste. And I think that that is a very fair assessment. It takes someone with strength to walk through this world given the state that it is in, and nonetheless to remain chaste. But again, chaste is not just simply not doing something, it is also a positive thing. Sex is a gift from God to men and women who step forward and make the radical pledge to stay together for the rest of their lives. They make a pledge to show the world the love that Christ has for His church, and vice versa. A man and a woman who stand up on their wedding day are promising to the priest and to everyone gathered, we, the two of us, are going forth from here to represent the love that Christ has for His church, to make people think about that when they see us loving one another. That is no small commitment, and it is no small reward, the gift of sexuality. Sex is the gift from God and a way for married couples to bond. There is an intense bond that is formed when two people have sex. And again, we've talked about what happens when people try to deny that. Most of the issues I see with premarital sex involve the emotional trauma to men and women who tell themselves, I'm just going to have sex for fun. And they don't even understand what sex's proper context is within the marriage rite itself. Starting this spring, but gearing up to full strength by the beginning of next year, I promise I will not be asleep at the wheel any longer. We will be rolling out the most thorough, informative, and helpful sexual education program in the history of Catholic high schools. We will not let you down anymore. In a few moments, I will say the words that I reflected on at the Veterans Day liturgy. This is my body given up for you. May those of us called to holy marriage say that and mean it. May we train ourselves to wait for the day where we will say to our spouse, this is my body and I give it to you. May those already married learn to say that to their spouses as well.